Welcome to another This Week in Co-working discussion.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Co-working podcast feed. Once again, I am your host, Hector Kolonas, and today I'm joined by another great guest co-host, Will Stanford from Yardi Kube. Will, you are currently the head of co-working at Yardi Kube. How are you and how is co-working?
Great. Thanks for me. Chat again. Co-working is going great. I mean, you've got the co-working cafe from Yardi numbers in your report this week. They're going up and to the right. We're seeing strong kind of margin growth from the big players. We're seeing strong location growth from new entrants. So that's all good. And it feels like, as you would know better than most, the maturation of the conversation around co-working is going in a very sustainable direction. So I think it's all good things.
I totally agree with that, and it's another jam-packed newsletter this week. This week's episode is covering the recap of week 31, 2026. If you did want to follow along, pop over to thisweekincoworking.com and click on week 31, 2026. That'll have the summaries and the links to get a little bit more context about the stories that Will and I are going to discuss today. We are going to dig a little bit more into the Airbnb news from last week, look at some demand side growth, look at some supply side growth and numbers that we can kind of explore as to looking at where the market is going. And we're going to dig a little bit into AI before we jump and let you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Before that, I do want to thank Yardi Kube for sponsoring this week's coverage. Your support is what allows us to make the newsletter, the LinkedIn recaps, this episode, the video, all the stuff we do every week. So Yardi and Will, thank you for sponsoring this week.
No, thank you for continuing to do what you do, spreading the gospel, talking about the important news. I know we've got a couple of conversations with our team coming up with you in the next few weeks. I won't spend too much time on Yardi Kube here, but we're really excited to talk more in depth around our AI pursuits and more specifically around us as a software company's view on AI and our openness to the large language models and how that can help benefit our customers. So we might touch a bit of that today, but I know you're going to talk with our team more in depth about that.
Absolutely. And this is the first time actually in Twig history where we have 2 weeks sponsored by the same sponsor. So we get to kind of expand this conversation and talk a little bit more about what you guys are doing in AI and speak to some of the voices that we don't normally hear from and kind of bring that to the front and dig into the actual technical pieces of that, which we'll kind of explore a little bit more in next week's episode. Next week's episode, I'll be where most people sound like you because I'll be in Australia, but it will be another great episode, and we're already seeing the newsletter build up for next week, so it's going to be a really good one as well. So what I'm going to do, let's start at the top with one of the biggest stories from last week. It came up again this week because people are kind of learning more about the deal. This is all about the news that Airbnb is once again experimenting with making day passes and now meeting rooms available to their user base inside their app. Last week we discussed a little bit about this strategy of them becoming more of a super app and how they're approaching it. But I'm curious about your side. This week's news looked a little bit more at how this is kind of merging a form of co-working into nomadic travel and business travel. What do you think? Is this a good thing for our industry? But given that you are head of co-working at Yardi, there is a lot of divisions under that, right? You have Yardi Kube, but you also have acquired DeskPass, you have CoworkingCafe, you have Hubble. So this is kind of coming in to compete with the Airbnb for co-working world. So what do you think? Is it a net positive, or is this just another experiment they're trying?
My first reaction was probably a bit of a lame duck. I was like, we'll see, because it's one of many service offerings that they are trying to offer their customers, but they have one really good thing going for them, and it's adjacency. By the time that you're offered one of these services, they know where you're looking for it, when you're looking for it, and they've likely got some kind of commitment. You've booked a space, so it's very likely you're going to need something adjacent. So, they've done a fantastic job and will continue to do a great job of capturing intent. And I think that's something that we can't match yet. But that led me to thinking about what we're doing with AI, particularly agents in our space for that transient day pass on-demand booking business. We haven't, as a co-working business, done a great job of organically capturing that same intent as someone like Airbnb does. We can't compete with Airbnb or try to create that because they have a fantastic engine that's coming at it from a completely different angle. But it did, it's not driven from, I need something. We need to be creating that
Correct.
intent and getting the highest value customers to the thing that they need as quickly as possible. And I think that's one area where a lot of people are starting to see great returns from investment in their technology stack, particularly with AI. Um, the second thing it kind of brought up for me was, and this is probably where I started to think, we'll see, was it's at the low margin, low value end of the spectrum. I know all of our customers and most co-working operators would love more on-demand booking revenue, but it coming from an aggregator or, this is effectively like a new world co-working online travel agency, um, they're not getting many of those
Yeah.
dollars. There's a lot of hands in that pot before it gets to them. So it's interesting to see. I think it will play a role in it. Whether this expands its way out to other OTAs like, Concur, I can fully see that. And I think those will be great sources of ancillary revenue. But will it solve the structural challenge of more efficiently funneling demand through organic and partner channel? No, because that's really the private office business, and this doesn't address that.
Yeah.
There may be an existential extrapolation of where this goes. I think the online travel agency started with these onesie twosies and then ended up eating 20% of the revenue from the business. Goes that route. We've talked in previous pods about the structural challenges around space
Yes.
definition, unified backend architecture, data
Yeah.
feeds. Those things still exist, right? So us as an industry still have some things to solve before an Airbnb could be dangerous for our most valuable.
I completely agree. And I also know that they are essentially piloting with, you know, A, non-critical product. So as you said, auxiliary, but B, also it's not real time, right? It's things that like there is still a huge operational cost to service that dollar, right? So every dollar you got come in, someone has to spend 30 minutes and you're paying them $10 an hour. That's $5. You shouldn't be paying them $10 an hour, firstly. But if you are, you're paying them $5 to do 30 minutes of following up to get in potentially $4 of revenue. And so that is the
Yeah.
tricky part. Obviously, it is a pilot, and Airbnb has scaled out similar things before, but they've also tried similar things before and not had it roll out. We've had other platforms, other travel platforms, Amex business cards kind of rolling out their work passes into that. I'm like, I still don't know how well that went, right? And things like that, where it's like, I can see where they're going. I can see what they're thinking about, but I'll be very curious to see if they extend the pilot or if it's just like, okay, this is going to be just a thing that people can opt into to offer as like, because if they do go that way, I think that they also don't realize, as you were mentioning, the structural complexity of what a square office could be. It could be a day office, it could be a yoga studio, it could be a podcast studio, it could be a creator room, it could be a number of things. And how do you make that available in different flavors? They've barely figured that out and searching on Airbnbs. So I don't know how much they're going to invest into this because, as you mentioned, unless they're going into the office side, the revenue is just not there. Like we've seen again and again with on-demand booking platforms, super tight margins, ordinarily taking between 10 to 50% of the transaction. Even at that, if it's a premium office at $100 an hour, you're only getting $50 per booking, which is very, very low compared to the Airbnbs where it's several $100s per booking that they're bringing in.
Yeah.
So yeah, very, very interesting to look at those numbers.
I also wonder if I'm putting myself in the shoes of my customer, whether this is really my ideal customer. If I'm an operator, I want someone coming into the space as a trial to a longer term commitment, not someone who I know is only near my location specifically for that day
Yeah.
flight. Great people are going to be able to service that customer where they come from and have imprinted their brand on that customer such that they'll recoup some lifetime benefit
Yeah.
from them in their home market.
Having said that,
So
sorry to interrupt you, Will, there is this whole travel side, and we are seeing it with hotels roll out co-working brands. We're seeing it with retail rolling out co-working brands, and there are markets I can totally see this working in. Snowbirds, they come up for a certain amount of time. Things around sporting events like the World Cup, where folks came up here for 3 months or 2 months, they had to work somewhere, right? If they were paying 10K a ticket for a soccer game, I'm sure they had to work while they were here. And so I can see it working in those situations. And maybe that's just the product that it fits into, where it's not that kind of recurring members just for that surge. And I know that we've definitely talked about dynamic pricing on this podcast a bunch, but it's also where you can kind of see the most fluctuation on that dynamic pricing if this is literally just someone coming in and they just need it for a day or 2 days. You're not really going to give them like the teaser rate that you give to a local that you're trying to bring into your community. It is going to be a premium because just like when the city fills up and the hotels fill up, the prices go up. And so there could be that element that it's kind of an undercurrent that we have to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, talking through it, I mean, it makes me realize that this is probably more of a subsegment of on-demand booking compared to what we know of that customer today than it is a competitor to it. And I think we've agreed that it's not a competitor to kind of the main revenue for co-working today. But should it grow? I would love to see co-working offered through Airbnb, through more OTAs, through travel management software. And I think I completely agree with you. That should be offered at a higher price because there's lower long-term value and intent. Pods, travel adjacent co-working spaces, airports, sporting facilities, they're all growing, but it needs to be treated as something new, something that people, I think, are already wary of because they know the cost of customer acquisition and the margin on it, like the high ticket price. So I think it's good. It's a great evolution. It might be another indicator of faith in the segment and its longevity. But again, back to my original comment, like, we'll see.
I love that. On that note, we'll move over to another topic. There were two kind of links that I shared this week. There were two sides of the same coin. The one looking at how we've got growing demand, or we potentially could be having growing demand. The other one that's, we were seeing a growth in supply, especially here in the US anyway. We'll start with demand side. There was a post coming out of the team at a waste center, but the post was actually posted by a gentleman called Udbhav Jain. And he was actually retracting a previous comment that he made that, AI is actually going to shrink office usage. He's now saying that actually it's enabling us to get more desks filled because people are going solo or building smaller teams or spinning out, and sharing some statistics around the fact that we're actually seeing record numbers of solo or small businesses being founded, regardless of what kind of how the return to office debate is going. I know you had some thoughts on this data as well. How are you looking at this from where you sit?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone tracking co-working is looking at two things. One is how much enterprise adoption is happening for the high value items, and then how much low end business formation is driving those individual contributors and kind of more month to month member. I think that's more sentiment around return to office, flexible work, technology transformation in the workplace, all topics that we've talked about ad nauseum. But at the lower end, when we think about, new business formation, my LLM tells me that, last year there was 5.6 million new business applications. This year we're on track for 6.3. So strong growth. And that's coming firmly off 3 years post-COVID that was beating the years leading into COVID. So there is undercurrent there of like there's captive demand for people wanting to do their own thing. And I think there are now many more tools than there was 6 years ago for you to be a successful individual contributor or company that can scale that 5 years ago. So I think a lot of that is driving demand, frankly, to co-working. If I'm someone who needs, space for a small team or space to build, and there's many, many more people building, then it it's not outside of reason that that's going to drive increased demand into the kind of more transient membership based and day booking co-working.
Yeah, I mean, we keep seeing these cycles in co-working. Like very early co-working was the creators, the freelancers, the small businesses, the startups. It definitely started shifting more to kind of the enterprise use, balancing the P&L, making sure you aren't taking a space that you're not utilizing. We're starting to see that as people are going into business for themselves, and it's not just technical workers, right? It's folks who are going out and launching their own plumbing service or their own lawn mowing service, or they've now got better tools due to AI and other systems, whether they can actually effectively run this from somewhere like a co-working space. They don't need a server rack, they don't need hosting, they don't need all these additional things, or to go meet their accountant in person and get things notarized. Like everything is becoming more virtual. And so we are seeing that loop again around that was first enabled through things like the fax machine and the first desktop computer. And like that's what kind of kicked the first growth of co-working. So I'm definitely looking at the statistics to see, is this shift and this another kind of like slight underlying trend that we're seeing of a lot of leaders realizing that they can get a better work-life balance living where they want to live but servicing multiple businesses than being trapped by one business. And so this adaptation of people kind of going into fractional executive roles and kind of going out for themselves is also going to feed into these more premium co-working spaces, because they still, no one wants to leave an executive role and then go to like a budget co-working space, right? You still want that transition, but the budget is different, but also the AI tools are different. We've discussed this ad nauseum as well in the podcast, is that like as the way we interact with tech changes, so will the design of the spaces, right? More and more CEOs that I speak to are using things like Whisper or Claude's or ChatGPT's new chat feature, like voice chat feature, talking to their systems as if it was a colleague. Well, if everyone is used to putting their headphones on and sitting at a big long desk, you can't do that in that environment. And so it's just an interesting shift that we're kind of have to follow along and once again see where it goes.
Yeah, and I think it's also driving this. I mean, the increased conversation around virtual offices, mail services, all driven by these small companies, individual proprietors that need a professional presence, a place to go. And that's great. They're all high margin products.
Yes.
But I think both ends of the spectrum, we're seeing positive news, like new business formation driving more individual users into co working at the same time that we're seeing more enterprise adoption. They're both great trends that de-risk some of the hairier parts of the co-working business model
Yep.
COVID. I would feel much better underwriting both sides of my business today with what we're seeing in the market than I did, you know.
And the topic of underwriting is another one I want to do a deep dive into, because the capital markets and their relationship with co-working is just a fascinating tug of war that we're starting to see some movement in. So I'm really excited to kind of look at that at some point. Let's jump over to kind of the supply side. CoworkingCafe put out their Q2 2026 results. The result puts kind of US inventory at just shy of 9,400 or 9,400 co-working spaces. That is up 2.7% quarter over quarter and brings our total square footage as an industry across I think it's the main 50 cities, brings us total square footage of 166.3 or 0.4-ish million square feet, up 1.5%, but still sitting at that 2.3% of total office capacity. So great to see that going up, more supply. We're seeing more demand on the other side. Anything in those numbers that you're particularly excited about?
And the numbers show, like you said, up and to the right. The majority of the driver for that is new entrants to the market in non-major cities, which is great. I think that speaks to the de-risking of the model for all, driving more people to open spaces. Anecdotally, we speak with many small business owners opening up things for the first time, and they are being much more pragmatic than I have heard in the past. They are not overly optimistic. They are really focused on the nuts and bolts of what's it going to take to acquire customers, retain customers, and deliver high levels of service. And that's really cool to see. So it tells me that these new entrants are doing so eyes wide open, and they're not being sold some kind of
Yeah.
dream that this community, that co-working spaces are just a good
Yeah.
hang. On the larger end of the scale, I don't think it's moving the total location number, but I think it's moving the square footage. We've started to see like a resurgence of growth within the larger brands. Big announcements from the Marlin, from Mindspace, moving back into big cities and taking big
Yeah.
bites. I'm probably going to up the numbers, but I think Mindspace just took down 50,000
Yes.
square feet. Marlin, in the last couple of months, has announced 3 new locations in new markets. And that's fantastic to see. We weren't talking about that a year ago. Everyone was still consolidating, working their way out of existing liabilities. So it's great to see people renewing commitment to major market growth and taking big bites. There's a whole different conversation around the structure
Yeah.
itself. But we're also seeing people moving back to markets that I think had seen some structural challenges, namely places like San Francisco. I mean, I think that's a story of landlords being more willing to sign on the dotted line for more creative structures, plus, a rationalization of the co-working model. They're willing to go back into those markets with a different operating model, having perhaps failed at it
Yes.
previously, but knowing that the demand and the user is there. It's just about how they structure their business
Yeah.
and deliver it. So at the top end, yeah, I think we're seeing square footage added in a smaller number of locations by major players, and that's a quiet but very
Yes.
positive sign for our.
Yeah, I mean, in the last couple of weeks, there's definitely been a few expansion stories of taking an additional floor in the same building, or taking additional floors, or taking the entire building, which doesn't count as another
Yep.
location, but as you said, definitely adds or ramps up that square footage. I was looking over some of the statistics
Yeah.
for like the top 25 cities or regions in the actual stats this week, and every single one of the top 25 has added locations except for Manhattan.
Yep.
Manhattan is 308 this quarter, 308 last quarter. Every other region tracked has added 1 to 10, if not more, locations, with the exception actually of Los Angeles, who's the only one that detracted. They went from 351 to 349. So interesting to see that shift, and going back to that maybe those markets were the hottest markets before, but we are seeing Chicago back on a resurgence, replacing Dallas Fort Worth
Yep.
as the second biggest US city or concentrated city. I know there's a lot of M&A happening in Chicago right now, so there is this play as well. I think we're all going to see a little bit more bumps of spaces as some of the previously released locations are now taken over by other operators. We're going to see a little bit more spikes in some of those CBDs where some locations were shuttered over the last 2 years will come back as new brands over the next probably quarter or so.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And if you look at the recycling of WeWork locations, it tells you that the locations weren't bad, the need is there, the business model just had to change. And we've seen a number of operators make successful businesses out of the exact same box that failed a couple of years before.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that was not just the COVID effect, it was a structural change underneath the surface of how they ran their business.
And also, as you mentioned, the deal structures are changing. And that is
Yeah.
100% one of the things we keep hearing about. We host a bunch of leadership roundtables here on the East Coast, and it's something that keeps coming up, how the relationship with the landlord is changing, even from one month to another. Like deals that they started working on the previous month were a no-go. And then now all of a sudden the landlords are like, hey, let's actually explore that a little bit more. We're seeing a lot more owner operators in the US, which was traditionally 3 or 4 main firms. We're seeing a lot more ownership groups start to explore this. And of course, going into Q1, we're going to see the first resurgence of this new sort of European wave of operators coming into the East Coast. That is definitely going to shake up the market as well. So definitely look forward to digging into more of these numbers, hopefully with you or someone from the Yardi Kube team again later in Q1, just to kind of look at what has changed since then.
Yeah.
Cool.
Happy to open kimono as much as we can to educate everyone in the market.
Awesome. Let's do that then. So the last topic I wanted to discuss with you was this kind of shift that we're seeing, and you're definitely one of the best people in the market to discuss this with because you are at a SaaS business. You are at a software as a service business. You already traditionally, that is your model. But we're seeing this shift now to kind of more open data structures. We're seeing the shift of MCPs, more API access, people being able to kind of interconnect their systems a little bit more freely. We saw a couple of months ago, Yardi released one of the first MCPs in our industry, just on the Yardi traditional side. As yes, Virtuoso, yes. So you guys were kind of early to that, playing in that side. Obviously, that's not on the Yardi Kube side. We'll get to that in a sec.
Yep.
But then you have like Nexus doing MCPs. You have SpaceSpring rolling on MCP. So there's adding AI agents, but then also MCPs for folks who didn't listen to the AI deep dive that I did. It is just a way, think of it as like a USB port that you can connect your system into the other system so you can speak to it. So if you think about connecting my Claude framework or system to, let's say, Yardi Kube, I can ask Yardi Kube how many people checked in last week, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, without having to go through the dashboard, find a report, et cetera. So it's like talking to the database, really. What are you guys thinking about this whole shift towards MCPs and more open APIs? And I know this is something we're going to discuss with some of your colleagues later.
Our product team are going to be chatting with you extensively about this, so they can talk about the technical side. But high level, we had this discussion around openness versus closed, and we had to balance a couple of things. Like, one was the rapidly evolving needs of the customer to get access to their data across ours and other systems. The question we had was, can we scale quickly enough to give them the intelligence that they need across a rapidly evolving product and customer set to be a great partner? And I think the answer there was maybe, but we don't know in the world of AI because it's changing so quickly. But the second question is, like, can we continue to be a secure and reliable environment for their most critical data? And I think the answer is that, like, that's a bedrock of all of our products, and we will not shift from that. So we led towards building strong, open relationships with all of the LLMs. Like you said, the Virtuoso connector for our Voyager product, our core accounting product, is released, and we're going to be rolling those out across all of our products. So you will see a Cube MCP for Claude, ChatGPT, Copilot, etc. It doesn't matter which model you are using, you will be able to get your data from us out, and it will be normalized. The model will be trained on the context of the data that's within our system, so it understands the relationship between a contract, a charge, a customer. It'll understand the concepts of economic versus physical occupancy. So you will be able to get intelligent answers out. So I think business intelligence is going to go through the roof. There should be nothing that you don't know about your business, 12 months from now when all of the MCPs are released. But we know that automation is one big part of this, not just intelligence. So what you probably don't want to do today is open your system up to an agent from the outside that hallucinates, doesn't understand context, and has the ability to write to your system. I mean, there's enough examples of that out in the market of agents just going wild. And you don't want to do that when they're running 24/7. So we need to balance the data security and governance that we provide with our software, data security, SOC 2, SCIM provisioning, SSO, all those things that make most critical data, your spaces, your bookings, your financials, secure. And then we need to add on this layer of openness because, if we give you an agent, it's going to be a thing that has the ability to write to your system, but we are going to have trained it and put the governance in place to know that it cannot do anything untoward. We're going to work with people on the native agents that we've built to help build automation, and additional customer service into business. But we're also at the same time going to open ourselves up so that operators can generate their own business intelligence, reporting, dashboarding, etc. And in time, if they want to build things on top of our system that we can then add that governance layer to, we'll bring it inside ours. We're very willing to work with any of our customers and consultants on bringing outside agents into our system once we've vetted them for security. So it's a combination of opening up, but enough that we're not going to lose that core trust that we have from our customers.
And it is an interesting conversation we keep having with executives all across the industry is Yes, they want to be able to speak to everything. B, they don't exactly know what they're doing. Everyone's kind of prompt wizarding through their setups and their extraction of data. And as you said, read and write accesses is way beyond many of the prompts that people are testing right now. But there is also this idea that they can save a huge swath of money by building their own software or building their own databases or building their own kind of vibe coded solutions. And the one
Yep.
conversation we keep seeing now is this difference between a flat or a reliable cost of software, traditionally
Yeah.
SaaS, and this unknown of what is a token gonna cost us 6 months from now. And this
Yep.
idea that, oh, well, we're just gonna replace all software with compute. The exchange rate's not in our favor, right? Especially when you have to recreate the learnings, the security practices, the governance, all the things you've mentioned before, and just kind of putting that into your own software without a team, without all that. Sure, you can be a one-person AI company, but your spend on tokens to run that entire company is going to be through the
Yep.
roof. And so it's just a very
Yep.
interesting conversation I keep having with operators, almost in every continent, where it's like, yes, we see this power, but if the automation is more expensive than having 5 people just do it, it's always going to be the financial director's decision to be like, well, what are we actually doing here? And it's a very, very
Yep.
big topic that I know a lot of the people I speak to are talking about that. But like when you guys think about your AI agents, etc., obviously you've got AI agents that are running on some form of LLM that you absorb the token cost for. But on the MCP side, the customer absorbs that cost for compute. So, how are you guys thinking about that? Will you shift like Salesforce and some others to a utilization based pricing for the AI side? I know we're going to dig a little bit more into that in another conversation, but how are you thinking about that? Because you also don't know what a token is going to cost in 6 months' time.
We don't, but I think we still believe that the standardized, predictable cost of software is going to be something that, at least in the medium term, will be a benefit to companies. We're obviously going to have to start radically defending ourselves against. I could do this on. Think about that from like three buckets. Like, is what people can build on their own going to be impactful? And impact has a relationship to what can it actually do, and can you make it do it? Like, two is there risk associated with it, and that comes down to like the governance and data security elements. And three is like, what's it going to cost? If it's something that is high impact, you can make secure, but it's extremely high volume, then maybe you should push that to someone at a software provider who's going to be a compute
Mm-hmm.
cost hedge for you. And you're going to be able to toggle those three kind of considerations for your business. And I think where we're going to see it happen first is, if it's high impact, it doesn't require, a high degree of security, and it's low frequency or low volume, something like, a support agent that can just provide a rapid response that creates a delightful customer experience, but it can't mess with your core systems or structural data. That feels like something you might want to do on
Mm-hmm.
your own,
Yep.
right? But if you had to dial up some of those other considerations, you might be creating risk or uncapped cost for yourself moving
Yep.
forward. So back to where we think we can provide it, we think that financial data and like core SaaS objects, like your contracts, your charges, we believe that's firmly a moat, and we want to keep providing security over that data for our customers. But we do want to provide that architecture such that if someone says, hey, look, I think the security and the velocity of what we want to build on our own is low, sure, we want to give you the off ramp to go do that yourself. But we're always going to be here, and we're not going to compromise on those other elements. And back to your question about cost, like, we want to provide reliable unit based pricing, not usage or seat based pricing in the medium
Mm-hmm.
term, because we want to be a hedge for our customers such that they can get those things within the procurement and budgeting cycles that they
Yep.
know today. That might change in future, but I think structurally that's the way people buy today, and I think it's a benefit in the longer term that we can provide our customers.
Well, I'm not going to take up any more of your time or any more of our listeners' time. Where are you going to be over the next couple of weeks if people want to kind of bump into you? Are you going to be at any of the conferences? Where can people look out and say hi to you?
Coming up in the next few months, we've obviously got GWA. We're going to be in Miami for some executive dinners. So hopefully we're bumping into a lot of customers there. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be in Australia for FWA like you are, which is a bummer. I would love to go home and see my people. But what I would ask from you, Hector, to perhaps put yourself in the firing line is once you've gone to Australia, let's get a review of your favorite coffee spots. Just to see whether you can throw yourself under the bus for some Australian operators who are extremely.
I will absolutely take you up on that. And I do know that I've already got a Tim Tam challenge or something, Tim Tam Slam lined up that I've got to do as well. There's definitely 2 or 3 people trying to force me to try Vegemite as well. So I'm going to have to come back and just report back on, I know the people are already amazing, but what was the actual experience there and what does Flex look like on the ground? I'll definitely report back on that.
Love it. Thanks for having me today. Good to chat as
Absolute
always.
pleasure. And thanks again. Take care, everybody. We'll be back in your podcast feed next week.